The week passed in a blur of drills, bruises and brief, rare moments of rest. Morning bells rang before the sun even breached the hills. Nights ended with limbs sore, boots caked in mud, and lungs aching from wind sprints and command shouts. Rain came twice. Once a steady drizzle that turned the course to soup, and once a downpour that soaked even the gear packed in oilskin. But not once did Inigo let them stop. "You don't choose your battlefield," he'd said, the rain dripping from his soaked collar. "So you train for everyone." And they did. They learned how to fight uphill with wet rifles. How to fall and recover without snapping ankles. How to pass orders with a gesture or a whisper. How to stay calm when the fog was so thick they couldn't see each other, only hear the thump of boots and the click of safeties disengaging. Meryl's saw drills had become smoother. She no longer fumbled with the barrel change. Brenna could link belts in her sleep. Sark and Hal took point now with practiced eyes and tighter formations. Leo, once the jokester, became the group's rhythm keeper, reminding others to hydrate, reload, and press on when morale flagged. Even Lyra, despite never calling herself a soldier, ran her lines with unflinching precision. Her crossbow was replaced with a scoped rifle, and her calm demeanor under stress made her a natural spotter and support shooter. And Inigo? He watched. He adjusted. And only sometimes he allowed himself to feel proud. On the 7th day the clearing was empty. No drills. No yelling. No JLTVs revving through the trees. Instead, the recruits stood in a straight line facing east, just as the first rays of sunrise spilled over the treetops. Their boots were polished. Their gear cleaned and slung properly. Meryl even tied her hair back with a new leather band. Brenna wore a fresh scarf from her sister's village. Sark and Hal had tucked in their sleeves. And Inigo stood before them, not in his usual instructor's gear, but in a dark green coat, simple and clean, marked only by the stitched emblem of a phoenix rising from flame. Lyra stood beside him, also dressed plainly but with the unmistakable poise of command. A small satchel hung from her shoulder. "No yelling today," Inigo said after a long silence. "No runs. No crawls. Today we remember why we started this." He stepped forward and drew a folded parchment from his coat. He held it up for all to see. "This is your contract." He paused. "No, you're packed. Not with me. Not with any crown or army. With each other." He handed the parchment to Meryl, who blinked but took it with both hands. "It says nothing about glory," Inigo continued. "Nothing about medals. Just the tenets you've lived for the past 7 days. Discipline. Trust. Sacrifice. Fire doesn't forge weapons unless the metal bends to it. And you've all bent. Broken maybe. But reformed stronger." He gestured to Lyra, who stepped forward and opened the satchel. One by one she handed out leather-bound arm guards, each one stitched by hand with a sigil, a phoenix coiled around a broken sword. "Instructor," Sark said, voice soft but clear, "is this?" "Your mark," Inigo replied. "Not rank. Not title. Just proof you endured. That you didn't quit. That you showed up when it counted." They fastened the bands without fanfare. Not because they weren't proud, but because pride didn't need shouting anymore. Inigo folded his arms behind his back. "You'll get a final test," he said. "But this time it won't be under my control." They looked up, puzzled. "The next trial comes from outside these woods. From people who won't care what you've been through. Who will try to take what you've built. You'll be sent in pairs. 3 assignments. Recovery." He didn't explain further. Instead he took a breath and said, "Today though you get to rest. You've earned it." Just as some relaxed he added, "But first, you run the course one last time." Groans and laughter mixed in the morning air. Lyra smirked. "You had to ruin the moment." Inigo only grinned. They ran it faster than they ever had. Not flawlessly but without hesitation. They moved like a single thought. Brenna's reloads clicked before Meryl even called for them. Sark and Leo alternated flanks, Hal acting as mobile overwatch. Lyra gave clear sight calls from behind, and for once, no one shouted over anyone else. At the end of it they didn't collapse. They stood. Panting. Grimy. Grinning. "I wish my brother could have seen this," Meryl said quietly. "He would've," Brenna answered. "He's in you." Leo added, "He'd be impressed. Probably a little terrified too." Meryl laughed, and for the first time it didn't carry sadness. They gathered back at the fire pit where it all started. There, laid out on cloth, were fresh bread, smoked fish, and warm spiced cider. A feast by their standards. Lyra passed around wooden plates, and for once no one ate with urgency. "You didn't have to do all this," Sark said, his mouth already full. "I didn't," Lyra said. "The village near the ridge sent it. Said it was thanks for chasing off a rogue beast last week. Turns out your training echoes beyond these woods." They went quiet at that. Not out of humility, but realization. They had started as strangers. Some had barely held a weapon. Others had only signed up because it meant food or shelter. But now they were being thanked, remembered, trusted. When the meal was done and the embers burned low, Inigo stood once more. "Rest today. Tomorrow your missions begin. You'll leave these woods not as recruits, but as guardians of what remains." He looked over each face, meeting each gaze. "This is not the end of your journey. It's the end of your excuse." He turned and walked toward the trailhead. Dismissed. But no one left immediately. They sat in silence, warm and full, watching the smoke rise through the canopy. Graduation had no ceremony, no medals, no marching parade. But somehow this felt like more. The clearing felt different after the final run. The urgency was gone. The pace had slowed. For once there was no yelling, no drills, no targets to drop. Just food, warmth, and the fading scent of pine smoke curling into the late afternoon sky. They ate in clusters, sprawled across tree stumps, smooth boulders, and blankets that Lyra had laid out earlier in the day. It wasn't a grand feast by noble standards. No silver cutlery, no roasted boar or honey-glazed duck. But it was the best meal they'd had since arriving. Warm bread, still soft in the middle. Dried berries soaked in sweet wine. Smoked fish wrapped in fresh-picked leaves. And mugs of spiced cider passed hand to hand, always refilled before anyone could ask. Sark groaned as he leaned back on a log. "This is what the gods must eat in their halls." "You say that about every meal," Leo replied, tearing another chunk of bread with his teeth. "Because it's always true. I have a refined palate." "You once ate a boot sole to win a bet," Hal added. "That was for glory," Sark said, raising his mug with a grin. "Not flavor." Laughter rippled through the group. Meryl sat near the edge of the group, the saw resting beside her like a loyal dog. She wasn't eating much, just picking at the berries and sipping her drink slowly. She looked up when Lyra joined her, settling on the grass with folded legs. "Not hungry?" Lyra asked. "I am," Meryl said. "Just thinking." Lyra waited. "I never finished anything before," Meryl admitted. "School, apprentice work, even chores. I'd always quit halfway. My parents thought I was lazy. Maybe I was." Lyra tilted her head. "And now I finished this." She looked down at her band. The phoenix symbol caught the fading sunlight. "I think I can finish more." "That's not lazy," Lyra said. "That's just someone who hadn't found the right fire to stand in." Meryl smiled at that. Just a small one, but real. Across the clearing, Brenna and Fern were trying to braid wildflowers into a crown. Neither had the dexterity for it, and every few minutes the whole thing collapsed in their hands. But they kept trying anyway. "You know," Fern said, "when I signed up I just wanted food and boots. I didn't think I'd actually become anything." "You're still not much," Brenna teased, but gently. "But at least now you don't run when things explode." "That was one time. It was 3. Fern chuckled and tossed a petal at her. "You think we'll stay together?" he asked, more serious now. "After all this?" Brenna looked across the group. At Meryl, quiet and focused. At Leo, who was teaching Hal how to juggle acorns. At Sark, dozing with a smile and crumbs on his shirt. "I don't think we could split apart," she said. "Not really. Even if we're sent to different towns or guard posts. We're always going to remember this thing. The fire. The way we came out." Fern nodded slowly. "Family." She looked over. "Yeah. Family." On the other side of the fire, Inigo sat alone with his journal, half listening, half writing. Every so often he'd glance up and make a mental note. A posture, a reaction, a smile that hadn't existed a week ago. He didn't join the feast in full. He'd eaten early. He had no more orders to give tonight. But watching them, that was enough. Until Lyra walked up and dropped a plate into his lap. "Eat," she said. Or I'll tell everyone you're secretly a softie." He raised an eyebrow. "I thought they already suspected." She sat beside him with her own plate. "Let them suspect. Doesn't mean we give them proof." For a few moments they ate in silence. The sun began to dip, casting golden streaks across the clearing. Fireflies hovered near the edge of the woods. "They're good," Inigo said finally. "They are," Lyra replied. "You did well." "I didn't make them strong," he said. "They chose that. You gave them the place to choose it." Inigo glanced toward Meryl, now laughing softly at something Leo had said. Toward Sark and Hal, who were arm wrestling with dramatic flair. Toward Brenna and Furin, who had finally finished a lopsided flower crown and placed it on Sark's head while he slept. "You think they're ready?" he asked. Lyra didn't answer right away. "Then, no one's ever ready for the real thing. But they'll survive it. Together." He looked at her and gave a small nod. "Then I'll send them with peace in my heart." Lyra leaned closer. "And when do you rest, Inigo?" He chuckled. "Same answer as always. When I'm dead. When I'm no longer needed." She nudged him gently. "Maybe you already are. Just not in the way you think." Across the fire someone pulled out a lute, Lyra's, though she hadn't brought it out tonight. It was Meryl. She held it awkwardly but determined. I watched Lyra play. So I tried learning something." Fingers fumbled, strings twanged, but after a moment, a melody emerged, clumsy but heartfelt. The fire grew quieter. Then voices rose. Not in perfect song. Not in tune. But together. "By moonlit stream and embers glow, we walked the path the brave men know." Inigo didn't sing. But he listened. And if anyone had been looking, they might have seen his shoulders relax. Just slightly. Later, when the fire had burned low and bellies were full, they shared stories. Of childhoods, of losses, of the dumbest thing they'd ever done. Leo's story about trying to tame a wild goat with honey earned the most laughter. Brenna's tale about getting stuck in a chimney while hiding from chores got second place. And when it was Meryl's turn, she paused. Then said, "I once watched the stars with my brother for 6 hours straight. He told me each one had a name and that when I felt small I should remember I had a name too." The fire went quiet at that. No jokes. No follow-ups. Just silence. And then a quiet voice from Hal. "What was his name?" "Eldon." They all murmured it like a shared blessing. Eldon. It felt like the right way to close the night. When the last cup was drained and the coals flickered low, Lyra stood. "Tomorrow we begin a new chapter," she said. "Not as trainees. Not as children. But as those entrusted to carry what comes next." They rose with her. Inigo approached last, placing a hand on the phoenix-marked armband worn by each of them. "You're not soldiers," he said. "You're not warriors. Not yet. But you are ready." A breeze swept through the trees. The stars blinked above, silent and eternal. And the fire burned low but never out. The city of Elandra was veiled in morning mist, its slate rooftops and rising towers softened by the haze. The streets below were already waking. Carts rolled over cobbled lanes, shopkeepers swept thresholds, and bells chimed distantly from temple spires. But Inigo wasn't here to admire the view. He stood before the great ironwood doors of the Adventurers Guild, dressed not in armor or travel gear, but in a tailored black tunic with a phoenix insignia stitched onto the left breast. At his side, Lyra adjusted the folds of her cloak, her expression unreadable. "You sure about this?" she asked. Inigo nodded. "They've earned it." He stepped forward and pushed the doors open. The guild hall buzzed with its usual rhythm, clinking tankards, shouted boasts, and notices nailed to the mission board. Veteran adventurers lounged in corners, fresh recruits gawked at bronze-ranked banners, and clerks scribbled into ledgers behind polished counters. But as Inigo passed, heads turned. Some recognized him as the Riftwalker. Others only knew him as the man who'd taken a dozen nobodies into the woods for weeks and returned with something different in their eyes. He crossed the central hall, boots echoing on the marble floor, and approached the back wing, where a double staircase wound up to the administrative offices. A pair of guards flanking the entrance offered a nod but didn't bar his path. They knew who he was here to see. "Enter," came the reply. He pushed the door open. Guildmaster Thorn sat behind a long table of red oak, littered with dispatches and stamped seals. Thorn didn't rise. He merely looked up and folded his hands. You're early. Inigo stepped inside, Lyra behind him. I figured punctuality might help. It does. Sit. They did. Thorn studied them for a moment, gaze flicking between the two like a craftsman inspecting steel for flaws. You've been gone 3 weeks, he said. And I've heard rumors. Civilians sparring in the woods. Loud weapon reports echoing over the valley. Sightings of strange wheeled beasts. Inigo's lips twitched. That about covers it. Thorn leaned forward. So, tell me, what have you brought back? Inigo reached into his satchel and produced a slim folder. Inside, detailed training logs, performance charts, written evaluations of every recruit and printed copies of the new unit structure. He placed it on the desk. Thorn didn't touch it. I'm not interested in paperwork. I'm interested in outcomes. What do they know? What can they do? Inigo leaned back slightly. They know how to move, shoot, cover each other. They've run simulations under fire, learned to use tactics from where I came from. They faced stress, fatigue, failure, and they came out stronger. Thorn arched a brow. That's a lot of talk for fresh bloods. They're not fresh bloods anymore, Lyra said, voice calm but firm. I see. The guildmaster was silent for a long moment. Then he stood. Come with me. They followed. Down the stairs. Across the guild hall. Through a side passage few used. One that led to the internal training ground behind the main complex. The grounds were empty at this hour. Dew still clung to the grass. Training dummies lined the perimeter along with sand pits, obstacle walls, and a range for archery and close combat drills. Thorn turned to face them. Summon them. Inigo nodded and raised a small flare stick from his belt. He struck it against his palm. There was a snap and a hiss as blue smoke curled into the air. It didn't take long. From the nearby barracks came the thud of boots. 11 young men and women, dressed in mismatched gear but moving with clear formation, emerged onto the field. Meryl, the saw slung across her back, stood at the head. Brenna and Furin flanked her. Sark, Hal, Leo, and the others took their places without being told. All wore their phoenix armbands. They stood at attention. Thorn's expression didn't change. But he stepped forward, walking the line. Name, he said to the first. Meryl. Fire support. He moved to the next. Brenna. Assistant gunner and field medic. Furin. Logistics and perimeter scout. Sark. Forward breach and heavy melee. Hal. Pathfinder. Leo. Morale and skirmisher. And on it went. Thorn returned to the front and looked to Inigo. Impressive. On paper. But a few names and titles don't make a team. Show me. Inigo smiled faintly. You'll want to stand back. What followed wasn't a demonstration. It was a storm. The team moved like clockwork. Meryl dropped into firing stance behind cover while Brenna fed her belt. Hal and Sark advanced to flank, shouting callouts. Targets, preset by Inigo earlier that morning, popped from concealed spots, each marked in bright colors. Leo barked position updates. Brenna threw a smoke flask to simulate cover. Furin dragged a wounded dummy out of danger while Meryl laid suppressing fire. The air thundered with short bursts. No wasted motion. No tripping over orders. Just seamless transitions, real coordination and earned trust. When it ended, they regrouped in perfect formation. No one spoke. Thorn exhaled through his nose and crossed his arms. That's not guild standard training, he said at last. No, Inigo replied. It's foreign but it's effective, especially against literally every monster or army in this world. Silence stretched between them. Then Thorn nodded once. Hey, you got me good. When the time comes for a rift to open, I will personally advise the king to send you and your new team to that rift. You guys have been effective and still I'm sorry for the loss of your 2 comrades, but the ones that you replaced, I have hopes for them. There's no need to apologize, they know what they signed up for. It's not going to be easy to deal with monsters, Inigo said. Very well, I will keep you guys in touch when the rift were to appear. For the meantime, you can do a quest together and see if you can really handle yourselves inside the rift. Inigo's eyes beamed with an idea. So you have a quest for us? I do. It's A-rank termination quest. The room quieted. Even Lyra, usually unfazed, shifted slightly beside Inigo. Termination quests were no small matter. A rank meant real danger. Intelligent enemies, complex terrain, unpredictable outcomes. The kind that could kill you even if you did everything right. Thorn pulled a parchment scroll from his desk and rolled it out flat. Inked lines revealed a rough map of southeastern Elandra, near the edge of the known wetlands. About 2 days on foot, he said. But with your contraption you'll make it there by sundown. Inigo leaned over to study the map. What's the target? The marshes were once a neutral territory. Controlled by a small lizardman tribe. Aggressive but not hostile. However, 3 weeks ago we received reports of abductions. Hunters and traders dragged beneath the water. Cattle mutilated. The usual signs. He tapped a black circle on the map. Then this showed up. Naga. Lyra's brow furrowed. Spellcasters. Yes, Thorn said. And more than one. We suspect a coven. They've corrupted the waters and driven the lizard folk into a blood frenzy. Now it's an alliance. And the villagers nearby have fled. Inigo absorbed the information carefully. Any teams sent before us? 3, Thorn replied. A bronze rank patrol, a silver squad, and a gold rank duo. And? Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. None returned. Inigo's jaw tensed. We'll succeed. Thorn didn't smile, but his expression softened. You've trained them well. But remember, this is no simulation. You see a Naga raising a staff, you shoot it. Don't wait to be impressed. He rolled up the scroll and handed it over. Eliminate the threat. Confirm the kill. Bring back proof. Inigo took it. Understood. As they turned to leave, Thorn added, and Inigo, if any of them fall, leave them. A team is only useful if it survives. Inigo didn't turn around. No one's falling. The roar of the JLTV echoed through the southern road by late morning, kicking up clouds of dust behind it. Most of the squad rode in the back, strapped into the reinforced benches that lined the interior. Brenna peeked out the top hatch, her hair whipping in the wind. Sark sat beside Meryl, chewing jerky like it was a fine steak. Fern was checking over the map, while Leo and Hal compared terrain notes and compass directions. Inigo drove with focus, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping a paper-wrapped copy of the mission scroll. Lyra rode shotgun, her gaze fixed ahead. How long until we reach the marsh? She asked. An hour and a half, Inigo replied. Terrain gets rough toward the end. We'll disembark there and proceed on foot. Lyra glanced back at the others. They seem calm. They're hiding it well, Inigo said. It's their first real mission and it's a death quest. Lyra gave a small smile. So was yours. True, he admitted. But I didn't bring 11 people with me. They crossed the river bridge by noon, passing through abandoned farmland. Straw huts sat empty, fields overgrown. The further they went, the more the land grew sickly. Trees drooped, water turned green with sludge, and the sky above seemed permanently overcast. Eventually, the JLTV slowed as the road gave way to marsh. The tires churned in soft mud. Inigo found a solid patch of raised land and parked under a canopy of twisted trees. He killed the engine. All right. This is where we go in. The squad disembarked without complaint, checking their gear. Meryl shouldered her saw. Brenna tightened the straps of her medical pack. Sark dragged a spiked hammer onto his back and Hal adjusted his belt of daggers. Inigo gathered them together. This is not a drill, he said, voice low. The marsh is our enemy as much as the monsters. Visibility will be poor. Movement will be slow. And our targets are intelligent and magical. No matter what happens, stay together. No heroics. Follow the plan. They nodded in unison. Lyra raised her voice next. We'll move in 3 groups. Meryl, Brenna, Sark, you're the core. Inigo and I will stay central with Fern. I'll Leo take flank. Keep your distance but stay within sight. With that they entered the swamp. The deeper they moved, the worse it got. The water came up to their knees. Mosquitoes the size of coins buzzed around their faces. The trees twisted like gnarled fingers and the very air tasted sour. Strange frogs croaked. Shadows darted beneath the water. Vines coiled like snakes. No one spoke. Then after nearly an hour, Hal raised a fist and crouched low. The others froze. He pointed at the ground. Tracks. Heavy, clawed with a tail drag behind. Recent. Multiple sets. some larger than others. Inigo nodded. They're near. Just then a scream. High-pitched. Human. From the west. Move. Inigo barked. They surged through the swamp, weapons up, feet splashing in rhythm. Trees blurred past. Hal led them to a narrow ridge of dry land. There in the clearing they found the remnants of a makeshift camp. Scorched logs, a torn tent and blood. Lots of it. But also, movement. From the dark water a scaled figure rose, dragging a limp man by the arm. A lizardman warrior, half covered in tribal armor, mud caking its face. Its yellow eyes locked onto Inigo. And then more emerged 4, 6, 8. Behind them, slithering from the shadows of the trees, came the Naga. They were tall, almost 8 feet, and their bodies coiled like serpents. Their upper torsos were human-like, but their faces were inhuman with fanged mouths and cold, slit eyes. Each carried a staff pulsing with green light. In position. Inigo yelled. The team split like clockwork. Meryl dropped behind a root-covered log, her saw barking to life in rhythmic bursts. Brenna crouched beside her, feeding the ammo belt and shouting targets. Sark and Hal moved left to flank, while Leo drew his bow and started loosing arrows into the advancing lizardmen. One of the Naga raised its staff. Take that one out. Lyra shouted. Inigo raised his rifle, squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck true, cracking through the Naga's staff and forcing it to retreat with a shriek. Fern tossed a smoke grenade, modified with alchemical herbs, and green mist exploded across the battlefield, blinding the enemy flank. Push right. Inigo ordered. Sark barreled forward, smashing a lizardman down with a crunch of bone and steel. Meryl adjusted fire to cover his charge. Another Naga tried casting, but Lyra's arrow pierced its throat before it could speak. The enemy began to retreat. The squad regrouped, breaths ragged, standing over bodies and mud. Status. Inigo shouted. No injuries, Brenna called. We're good. For now, Lyra muttered. They're regrouping. This was just the first wave. Inigo looked ahead toward the darker part of the marsh, where the water turned black and twisted spires rose like spears. They're protecting something. He pulled out the scroll again, reading the last line of the quest. Terminate the source of the corruption. Confirm the death of the Naga High Priestess. His eyes narrowed. We go deeper. We go deeper. The words hung in the air like a silent decree, dampened only by the thick, humid stillness of the swamp. Inigo wiped a smear of blood off his cheek and looked ahead, where the murky water narrowed into a shaded, unnatural passage. Thick reeds lined either side, rising like a tunnel of green spears. Beyond that, the terrain rose slightly and what appeared to be black stone poked through the bog. Not natural rock. Carved. Shaped. A temple. Eyes sharp, Inigo said. This is their nest. The team reorganized quickly. Sark and Hal led the front, blades drawn, their boots squelching in the mud. Fern stayed behind them with a hand axe and his utility pouch, ready to deal with traps. Lyra took rear guard while Meryl, Brenna and Leo covered the flanks, all weapons loaded and silent. They moved slowly now, through brackish water that rose to their waists, around trees twisted like tortured limbs. The sunlight barely pierced the canopy here. Everything stank of rot and decay, yet something in the air felt charged. Magical. The hairs on their arms stood up. Meryl whispering, "This place is wrong." "No talking," Lyra replied firmly. Still she couldn't deny it. The trees looked sick, but not just from disease, warped as if they'd grown under a curse. Some leaned toward the temple like worshippers kneeling. The vines were no longer just vines. Some pulsed. Others bled when brushed. It took them half an hour to reach the outskirts of the structure. The temple itself emerged from the swamp like a ruin drowned in time, black stone, covered in moss and glowing with faint green veins. Crude totems surrounded the exterior. Bones lashed together, hanging scales and writhing carvings of serpents etched into the pillars. Fern murmured, "We sure this wasn't here before?" Inigo ignored the question. Leo. Eyes up. Leo climbed one of the nearby roots, balancing like a cat as he pulled out his compact scope. He scanned the visible portion of the temple. "No sentries," he said. "But there's movement. Shadows inside. Something's watching us." Lyra nodded. "Then let's not keep them waiting." They moved in, stepping carefully across the crumbling stone platform that ringed the temple's base. Furin disabled 2 traps immediately, pressure plates linked to concealed spear pits. Whoever had built this place didn't expect survivors to come knocking. Inside, the air changed again. No longer humid, it was cold. The main chamber stretched high into a dome of woven stone and root. The floor sloped downward toward a dark pool in the center, where a glowing statue stood, half serpent, half woman, carved in obsidian. Coils wrapped around her base like a throne. Crystals pulsed around the edges, providing a sickly green light. All around, smaller shrines bled old blood and bone dust. Brenna whispered, "This place it's feeding on something." "Inigo," Lyra said. "Smell that." He did. Burnt incense. Then clatter. From the side chambers, shapes stirred. Lizard men stepped into view, slower than before, heads low, eyes glowing faintly green. Their skin was decaying, corrupted. "They're not alive," Hel muttered. "Or, not entirely." Inigo raised a fist. "Positions." The team snapped into their practice triangle. Heavy at the front, skirmishers to the sides, fire support at the rear. Meryl opened fire first. Her saw barked 3 bursts into the first undead lizard man. It staggered but kept walking, limbs dragging like a puppet. "Shoot the head or the heart," Inigo shouted. Brenna loosed a vial holy oil she'd crafted onto another. It burst into flame and the creature shrieked, crumpling into ash. Sark charged the one that got too close, his hammer cracking bone and scale with a single upward swing. But for every one that fell, another came. From the shadows, Naga acolytes slithered into the room, 3 of them. These weren't fighters. They were chanting. Building something. A spell. Inigo pivoted. "Lyra. Suppress them." She was already drawing, loosing 2 arrows in rapid succession. One struck an acolyte's throat, the other clipped a spell crystal. The chant faltered. Leo darted through the columns, tossing alchemical dust into another's face. It hissed and fell back, clutching at its eyes. For several tense minutes, the battle waged in confined chaos, stone echoing with cries, bullets, steel and shattered scales. Then, silence. Only the crackle of fire and the soft drip of blood remained. They stood, surrounded by corpses, half lit by the unnatural glow of the temple. "We're close," Lyra said. This was a guard post. Inigo agreed. He stepped toward the dark pool at the center, his boots splashing as he approached the statue. At its base, an offering bowl lay, filled with rotting meat, snake fangs and fresh eyes. And next to it, footprints. Large ones. "Back into formation," he said. This was just the threshold. Sark wiped his blade. "You think the High Priestess is deeper in?" Inigo nodded grimly. "There's a stairwell under this platform. It descends. Likely to the heart of the temple." Hal knelt to examine the floor. "Yeah. There's dried blood leading down. Something or someone was dragged." "We move in too," Lyra said. "Quick drink. Reload. Regroup." They obeyed. Brenna distributed water flasks and handed out her remaining oil bombs. Furin replaced the fuses on his smokes. Meryl reloaded her belt. Leo passed a faint smile to Hal, who looked pale but steady. Inigo drank, then looked at each of them. "This next fight isn't just a battle," he said. "It's the real test. I don't care how strong the enemy is. If we stay calm, work together and move as one, we win. We always win." A moment of stillness. Then nods. Weapons were checked. Belts tightened. And together they turned toward the stairwell that led into the bowels of the temple, toward the priestess and whatever horror waited beneath. Their feet thudded against worn stone steps, each one deeper than the last. Torches hissed in the gloom. The air grew colder. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Whatever waited below had been the source all along. The origin of the plague, the twisted curse, the reason this place pulsed with death. And they would end it. The descent was slow, each step echoing as the squad moved in tight formation down the spiral stairwell. Torches embedded in serpent-mouthed sconces hissed with cold green flame, casting eerie shadows against the carved stone walls. There were no murals, just deep scratches like claw marks made in panic. "Keep your eyes open," Inigo murmured. "No mistakes." The stairwell ended in a wide stone landing that opened into a cavernous chamber. far larger than any above. It was the temple's true sanctum. The air here was thin, dry, and cold as bone. A circular dais stood at the center, ringed by shallow trenches filled with black water. Atop it loomed the high priestess. She was coiled in regal stillness, her body wrapped around an obsidian throne fused with the rock. Half woman, half snake, her upper body bore the markings of ancient nobility, gold rings, layered necklaces, scales like polished onyx. Her eyes were shut. Sleeping? Praying? No one dared speak. Then her eyes opened, and the temperature dropped further. "Children of man," she hissed. Her voice slithered across the chamber, echoing through their minds. "You enter a sacred womb not meant for your kind. Leave and be spared. Defy me and drown in your own blood." Fern whispered, "She's bound to the temple. If we kill her, the whole structure might collapse." Inigo stepped forward. "We're not leaving." The high priestess rose, her coils unwrapping. Her full length was monstrous, easily 20 feet. A low chant began to pulse through the room, coming from unseen walls and alcoves. Then came the monsters. Lizardmen, no, not quite. These were different. Taller. Twisted. Fused together in 3s and 4s. Their mouths hung open unnaturally wide. Some had no eyes at all, only runes branded into their faces. They crawled down the walls, rose from the dark waters, shambled from behind pillars. Dozens. The squad formed up instantly, their triangle reinforced. "Hold tight," Lyra called out. Meryl fired first, unleashing a controlled burst into the mass approaching from the right. Sark and Hal blocked the left, their blades flashing. Brenna tossed a vial over the front line. It landed with a soft pop and a bright burst of flame. 3 of the beasts ignited, screeching. "Left side. They're flanking," Leo warned. Fern rolled a smoke charge, the canister hissing and erupting into a dense, silvery fog. Inigo dashed through it, striking 2 corrupted warriors with his blade and putting 3 rounds into the third. "Eyes on the priestess," he shouted. She had begun chanting again. Symbols glowed around her head, an incantation in motion. The stone dais was pulsing like a beating heart. "She's summoning something," Brenna shouted. "No," Fern corrected, pale. "She's awakening it." Suddenly the floor rumbled. A crack formed in the center of the dais, and from it, a massive clawed hand emerged. Black scales, dripping with ichor. "She's not alone," Lyra said grimly. "She's birthing a god." Inigo growled. "We end her." "No." "Form Alpha 2. Heavy breach." The squad split. Meryl, Brenna, and Leo remained to hold the corrupted at bay while Inigo, Lyra, Sark, Hal, and Fern charged toward the altar. "Fern, I need that barrier down," Inigo yelled. "On it." The priestess's throne was shielded by a translucent magical veil. Fern pulled a scroll from his pouch and began chanting a counter-rune. The shield flickered. The priestess hissed and flung a bolt of green lightning toward him, but Sark intercepted it, raising his shield just in time. The impact blasted Sark backward, but he held. The shield cracked. "Now!" Fern roared. Inigo dashed forward. He planted his boots and hurled a throwing axe, blessed with oil, into the priestess's chest. It embedded with a hiss. He screamed. Lyra loosed an arrow directly into the wound. The arrow ignited on contact and green flame burst from the wound. She retaliated, whipping her tail with terrifying speed, sending Hal sprawling and cracking the stone beneath Lyra's feet. Inigo rolled forward, came up low and slashed her underbelly. Black blood sprayed, burning the stone like acid. "Cut her chant," Lyra yelled. "I'm trying," Inigo roared. Suddenly, from the pit below the dais, something huge began to rise. A serpent's head, 3 times larger than any man's, emerged from the crack, mouth open, fangs dripping poison. The summoned godling. "Lyra, target the runes on the floor," Inigo commanded. She dashed left and fired 2 arrows into the etched symbols glowing on the ground. Fern followed with a disruption bomb, an alchemical grenade. It burst with white-blue light. The summoning circle shattered. The rising serpent screamed and fell back into the abyss, its partial form unraveling. The high priestess screamed in agony, her connection broken. Now she was vulnerable. Sark rejoined them, bloodied but furious. With a bellow he charged the dais, leapt, and slammed his warhammer down on the priestess's head. Her skull cracked. Lyra loosed one more arrow right between the eyes. And Inigo, blade in hand, drove the steel deep into her throat. She writhed once, twice, then fell. The silence that followed was suffocating. No more chants. No more screams. Only the hissing of extinguished magic and the bubbling of receding corruption. The remaining fused beasts collapsed instantly, lifeless puppets with their strings cut. Meryl's voice came over the calm rune. All clear up top. It's over. Inigo panted, leaning on his sword. Not yet. He looked around. The walls had stopped pulsing. The darkness no longer felt alive. But they weren't done. He climbed the dais and stood before the throne. From behind it he retrieved the temple's core relic, an orb of green crystal swirling with black smoke. This is it, he said. Lyra nodded. We take it back to Thorn. Proof of corruption. Sark wiped blood from his chin. Or proof that there's worse things out there than monsters. Fern chuckled weakly. At least we're alive. Hal groaned. Speak for yourself. Inigo glanced at the bodies around them, some still steaming. He let out a long breath. Let's go home. No one cheered. No one smiled. But they moved step by step away from the altar of death and back toward the surface, bloodied, battered, but together. And still breathing. The ascent had just begun. Blood still clung to their boots, thick and blackened from the high priestess's corpse. The orb, green and swirling with malevolent energy, rested in a reinforced containment case on Hal's back. But just as they neared the halfway point up the temple stairs, Fern stopped dead. Do you hear that? Inigo froze, then raised a fist silently. Everyone halted. A sound, distant and rhythmic. Thud, thud, thud. Like something massive dragging its limbs. From the walls, a low vibration pulsed outward. The green flames in the sconces dimmed, flickering uncertainly. Then an eerie groan echoed from below. The kind of sound stone should never make, wet and alive like flesh tearing. Fern backed up 2 steps. The summoning, we stopped it too late. Something still got through. The stairwell trembled. Chunks of stone cracked loose from above, and without warning a section of the steps behind them collapsed, sealing the path they'd just come from with a violent rumble. Shit, Hal muttered. We're boxed in. From below came a screech, high-pitched, grating and utterly inhuman. Then footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Inigo immediately dropped to a knee and summoned an RPG. RPG out, he barked. He pulled the launcher off his back, flipped the sight up and chambered a high-explosive round with a metallic click. The squad spread out, weapons raised. Lyra kept her bow drawn, eyes sharp. They waited. And then it came. Not a serpent. Not a lizard man. Something else. It pulled itself into view, massive, bloated, easily 9 feet tall. Its flesh was dark and slick, almost amphibian in texture, but it wore armor, cracked and ancient. One arm ended in a jagged blade fused to its bone. Its head was a horror. No eyes, just a row of vertical slits pulsing as it breathed. A large rune glowed on its chest, carved into the flesh like a brand. The hell is that? Leo muttered. Fern stared, voice dry. It's a herald. A failed godling. Inigo didn't wait for more exposition. Clear back blast. The squad ducked as Inigo braced the RPG, locked onto the massive figure at the base of the landing and fired. The launcher spat flame and smoke. The rocket streaked forward, striking the creature center mass with a concussive boom. The herald was thrown back, slamming into the stone wall and collapsing into the rubble. Dust choked the air. Target down. Meryl asked, scanning. But Inigo didn't lower his launcher. Through the settling smoke. Movement. The creature stood back up. Armor dented. Chest scorched. But still very much alive. And angrier. Shit. Reloading. Inigo yanked a fresh rocket from his back and began the process. Light it up. Lyra shouted. Meryl and Brenna opened fire. Leo dropped into prone, his scope aligned, and started firing precision shots into the creature's legs. Rounds struck home, sparks flew, flesh split, blood spattered, but the thing kept moving. Each step cracked stone, and as it surged forward, it raised its fused blade arm and hurled a slab of broken masonry toward them. Move. The squad split just in time. The stone block shattered against the stair wall where Brenna had just been crouching. Fern snapped his fingers. Blinding rune. He hurled a talisman toward the herald's feet. It erupted in a flash of white-blue light. Like a flashbang. The creature screamed, its chest runes flaring violently, and stumbled, dazed. Now. Inigo had the RPG up again. He fired a second time, this time aiming for the upper torso. The warhead struck true. The blast blew the herald off its feet and into the far wall, detonating in a rolling wave of smoke, fire, and shattered rock. A piece of its arm went flying. A chunk of shoulder was simply gone. The creature collapsed, unmoving. Everyone held their breath. "Hold your positions," Inigo said, lowering the launcher slowly. Lyra, eyes. She stepped forward cautiously, bow ready. The smoke cleared in slow wisps. Then, without warning, the herald's remaining arm slammed to the floor. It wasn't dead. It pushed itself up, slower this time but deliberate. Inigo's face tightened. That should have blown its spine out. Fern's voice was grim. "It's regenerating. The rune is pumping corrupted mana through its system." "And we just pissed it off," Sark muttered, tightening the grip on his warhammer. The creature howled, a sound that made the walls tremble, and charged. Straight up the steps. "Incoming!" Meryl shouted. Brenna primed a canister and rolled it down. A concussive charge detonated beneath the herald's feet, but it kept coming, now missing an arm but moving faster, bounding on all fours like some hellish beast. "Disperse and flank," Inigo ordered, switching from the RPG to his assault rifle. The squad broke formation. Lyra climbed onto a higher ledge on the wall, Sark and Hal stayed close to bait it in, and Meryl, Fern, and Inigo formed a mobile fire team to cut around the edges. Gunfire roared. Inigo fired controlled bursts into the creature's chest and legs. Sark baited a swing, took it on the shield, and retaliated with a slam of his hammer into the side of its knee. Prick. It dropped for a moment, just long enough for Hal to shove a short sword into its side, then retreat as it lashed out blindly. "Lyra," Inigo called. She loosed a volley, 3 arrows in quick succession. One struck the rune on its chest. The glow flickered. "That's it," Fern called. "Target the rune directly. It's the power core." Inigo adjusted his aim and emptied half a magazine into the glowing sigil. The creature reeled, its chest smoking, light sputtering like a dying ember. "Grenade." Brenna tossed a fragmentation charge at its feet. Boom. Chunks of black flesh exploded outward. The creature staggered, collapsed to one knee. Lyra fired one last arrow, this one tipped with alchemical fire. It struck the rune dead center. Flames burst from the impact, the rune cracking like broken glass. The creature shrieked, a deafening, guttural death knell that echoed across the entire temple. Then silence. Smoke. The herald slumped forward, its head striking the stone with a heavy thud. No movement. No glow. Just the stink of death. The squad remained still for another 10 seconds, weapons trained. Then Inigo raised a hand. "Clear." They all exhaled at once. Sark kicked the corpse once. "What the hell was that?" "Herald," Fern said again, panting. "A failed avatar. Probably trapped here as a failsafe. If the priestess died, it was designed to activate. So we nearly walked right into a second boss fight," Hal muttered. "Great." Inigo slung his rifle over his shoulder and retrieved his launcher. "And I just burned through both rockets." "You saved us with the first one," Lyra said, wiping blood from her cheek. "That gave us the opening." He nodded and turned toward the stairs. "We're moving. No telling if there's a third monster waiting." "Sark, Hal, double watch. Fern, I want your runes primed. We move in 5. The squad reformed, scarred, bruised, and running low on ammo, but alive. And the relic was still secure. As they ascended once more, no one spoke. They had survived 2 bosses in a single temple. The stone stairs narrowed near the summit, opening into a long corridor lined with flickering sconces. None of them spoke. Not after everything they'd just survived. The hallway twisted left, then right, leading them through a vaulted chamber with cracked murals and a ruined altar, then to a final stone arch. Fern pressed a palm to the rune lock beside it. The mechanism groaned and the stone parted with a reluctant hiss. Cold air rushed in. Inigo squinted into the sunlight spilling through the exit. They had made it. The outside world was waiting. The squad stepped out onto the temple's upper terrace, a crumbling cliffside landing overlooking a deep valley carpeted with mist. The ancient ruins behind them loomed like a dead god's skeleton, half buried in the mountainside. Below, where the forest met the slope, two Jalevis were parked beneath the shade of towering ironwood trees, heavy, armored, and blessedly intact. Sark let out a low whistle. Now that's a view. Lyra pulled her hood down, sweat-streaked hair clinging to her cheeks. Remind me never to accept another temple raid again. Brenna gave a tired laugh. You say that every time. Meryl dropped her rifle onto its sling and rolled her neck. And every time we end up taking the job anyway. Hal stepped toward the edge of the terrace and looked down the winding path that led to the base. Trail looks clear. No signs of movement. Good, Inigo muttered. Mount up. Let's not tempt fate. They descended the path in silence. Birds chirped overhead, an eerie contrast to the death and fire still clinging to their gear. Every snap of a branch made them flinch, but nothing followed. The two bosses were dead. By the time they reached the clearing, Sark had already popped the hood on the LED JLTV and was checking the coolant levels. She's still humming, he said. Bless her armored heart. Inigo nodded. Split between the two. Sark drives the lead, I'll take the rear. Lyra hesitated. Mind if I ride up top for fresh air? Go for it, Inigo said, tossing her a headset. Just stay clipped in. They loaded up quickly. The relic was placed in a shockproof case between Meryl and Fern in the back of Inigo's vehicle. Everyone double-checked their mags, sealed their helmets and slammed doors shut. Then the engines roared to life. Twin plumes of dust followed as the JLTVs pulled away from the temple ruins, tires grinding over gravel and mud. The convoy dipped into the forest trail, branches brushing armored sides, shocks bouncing with every bump. The rhythm of movement slowly lulled them into silence. Hours passed. And finally, as they crested the last hill before the valley city below, the skyline appeared, towers of steel and glass rising beyond the outer wall. Home. The moment the JLTVs rolled into the city's western checkpoint, the guards on duty snapped to attention. Even behind the tinted armored glass, it was impossible not to recognize the rumble of those war machines. Children paused in the streets, pointing excitedly as the lead vehicle rumbled through, followed by its twin, dust trailing behind like banners of smoke. Inigo slowed the rear JLTV to a halt just outside the guild building. It was already evening. Lamps glowed with soft white magic, and the plaza buzzed with returning parties, vendors, and carriages. A few heads turned, then widened as they saw who stepped out. Scarred, soot-streaked, exhausted, but unmistakably victorious. Lyra hopped down first, stretching her arms. Finally. No more stairs. Sark slammed the passenger door behind him. Or frogs. Or screaming god things. Heralds, Fern corrected, still cradling the containment case with the orb inside. Let's not forget what we faced. Meryl, now used to the sight of their squad drawing attention, gave a lazy wave to the gathering onlookers. We're alive, aren't we? That's a win. Brenna slid her helmet off and ruffled her sweat-matted hair. I'll take a bath in a whole pig. In that order. They didn't wait to be called in. The doors of the Adventurers Guild opened wide as Inigo pushed through with the rest of the team in tow. They bypassed the crowded board and the idle chatter of lower-ranked adventurers. Whispers rippled in their wake. Is that Lyra's team? They took the temple quest. I heard they fought a high priestess. No way, they're using guns now, right? That weird magic tech stuff. Inigo walked up to the main desk and met the eyes of the guild staff. The young receptionist, Elise, sat up straighter. You're back. She blinked at the state of them. Alive. Inigo offered a tired smile. Quest complete. Fern gently placed the reinforced containment case onto the counter. The orb inside still glowed ominously, though much dimmer now. That's the artifact, he said. Corrupted mana source extracted from the sanctum beneath the ruined temple of Sereth. Elise hesitated only a second before signaling an officer. Guildmaster Thorn is expecting your report. Please go ahead. They were ushered past the entry chamber and into the reinforced hall behind the guild's inner office. A few of the other staff glanced up as they passed. Men and women who had once thought adventurers like Inigo's squad were eccentric at best and insane at worst. No one said that anymore. Inside the war room, Guildmaster Thorn stood by a map-strewn table. The room smelled faintly of ink, gun oil and old stone. He turned as they entered, eyes sharp. "You're late." "We fought a herald," Inigo replied dryly. "That was enough." Thorn raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Fern took the lead, handing over the case and unfurling a scroll of notes. The temple was not merely a forgotten ruin. It was an active shrine to a long-dead pantheon, one that used ritual sacrifice to feed corrupted mana into a bound avatar. The high priestess was performing a rite when we breached the sanctum. Thorn nodded. "And the herald?" Sark grunted. "We killed her first. Then her pet godling woke up." Lyra tapped the table with a finger. "It wasn't just strong. It could take direct hits from RPGs and keep moving." "Regenerative," Fern added. The rune on its chest acted as a mana core. The more damage it took, the faster it pulled energy from the surroundings. "And you beat it?" Thorn asked. Inigo nodded. Second RPG to the chest cracked it. Grenades, suppressive fire, Lyra's arrows, directly targeting the rune finished the job. The guildmaster walked slowly toward the case and opened the lock. The orb pulsed inside, faint green veins dancing across the surface. "Corrupted," he muttered. "But stable." He closed it again and exhaled. "Well done." He turned back to face them fully. "This marks the first successful A-rank extermination using non-magical firearms. I reviewed the battlefield tests you filed with the quartermaster before deployment, but this proves it in real combat." Merrill nodded. "Not just that. It wasn't just firepower, it was coordination. Fire teams. Flanking. Suppression. None of the usual adventuring tactics. Formation combat," Thorn murmured, rubbing his chin. "Just like the old war archives from the Northern Front." "You taught us to use swords and spells," Brenna said, half smiling. "He taught us to use cover and angles." Inigo stood straighter. "I believe this is the future of adventuring, sir. Guns. Tactics. Discipline. You're saying adventurers should become soldiers?" "More like squads with training," Inigo said. "We cleared the temple with almost no spellcasters. Just planning and weapons. And yes, a bow." He glanced at Lyra, who smirked and patted her quiver. Thorn considered for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll approve the completion. You'll be bumped to S rank as a unit. And I'll recommend formal adoption of squad-based formations for future high-risk quests." He turned to the shelf behind him, pulled out a leather-bound ledger and began writing. As he worked, the squad looked at one another. For some, the title was just a word. For others, it was a turning point. Proof that everything they'd worked for had been worth it. Hal leaned over to Lyra and whispered, "Didn't think I'd live to see it." He grinned. "Told you the guns would work." Thorn closed the book and turned back to them. "There'll be a formal notice posted tomorrow. But as of now, you're recognized as the first successful modern combat unit operating under guild authority." "Does that come with a raise?" Brenna asked. Thorn gave her a withering look. "Go clean yourselves up. Pay will be issued after the case is transferred to the Arcane Division and after the quest documents have been processed." "Understood." As they turned to leave, Thorn called out one more time. "Inigo." He paused. "Yes, sir. I'll be organizing a summit next month. Other guilds. Other cities. I want you to speak. Explain what worked." Inigo blinked. "You want me to give a speech?" "I want you to teach them how to survive." "Novelbin." He hesitated, then nodded. "I will." Outside, the guild lobby had grown more crowded. Someone clapped as they walked by. Then another. Soon the whole first floor was filled with people applauding their return. None of them had expected it, least of all Lyra. She flushed and ducked her head. "Oh no." Brenna leaned close and whispered, "Smile and wave." They did neither. But they walked with pride. Later that night, around a fire in the squad's safe house, the relic sealed in containment and the stars bright overhead, Inigo finally let himself relax. He sipped water from a canteen and looked around. Sark was already snoring. Hal and Merrill were playing cards. Brenna was cleaning her pistol. Lyra leaned against a wall, half asleep, bow propped beside her. Inigo set the canteen down. "We did good," he said softly. Lyra cracked an eye open. "We did better than good. They were adventurers. But tonight they felt like something more. Something new. Something that worked. And the world would never be the same again.